My name is David Lee Summers, and I'm reading from my story, Dreams of Flight, which appears in the anthology Forgotten Lore, Volume 1, A Cast of Crows. Professor M.K. Maravilla bent over a black feathered form about 2 feet long. Illumination came from a hole in the roof of the abandoned cabin he now occupied, which he suspected once belonged to one of the lumbermen who traded in the settlement some 75 miles away. He peered inside the raven's body through jeweler's loops attached to a pair of magnifying glasses, accessing the final assemblage of tiny springs, cogs, and gears gathered over months of travel for the sole purpose of collecting cast-off watches, metronomes, music boxes, and compasses, anything with parts he might use in his experiments. He made one careful adjustment with his tiny screwdriver, then examined his work. He assured the wax cylinder for recording bird calls and other natural sounds would rotate unimpeded. He checked the tension of the springs. Just one more thing to do. He reached for a heart-shaped locket that once belonged to his daughter Verdad. Inside lay a lock of her raven hair. He touched it with longing. Together they had dreamed of her becoming a scientist and engineer like him. Birds and flight fascinated her. They had loved studying them together. Those dreams had died, as had she. He closed the locket and kissed it before nestling it in the bird's chest compartment. His task complete, Maravilla carefully fastened the hatch lest he disturb the inner clockworks. He sat back, removed the magnifying lenses, and admired his work. He had found the raven's body at a trading post in the settlement called Flagstaff, where lumberjacks took their logs to the trains passing through northern Arizona. One of the clerks at the post also practiced taxidermy. He had done fine work preserving the bird. Maravilla had hated cutting into the fine stitches and removing the sawdust and stiff wire framework, but he was on a mission. Now to see if his project had succeeded. He cradled the raven filled with clockwork, springs, gears, and a lightweight framework connected with hinges and ball socket joints, and took it outside, where he gasped at the view before him, a visage at once frightening, sublime, and glorious. An enormous rift cleaved the earth as far as he could see, both east and west. The sight frightened him with its profound depths. He found it magnificent in its strange, gigantic forms and glorious in its colors. Bold striations of red, yellow, white, and greenish-gray striped the great rift's walls. Here and there he glimpsed the river almost a mile below him. He stood on the rim of the Grand Canyon, which thrilled him with its witchery of light and shade. Verdad would have loved this place. He closed his eyes at the memory of her screams as soldiers took her and her mother away from him. They had shot his wife and daughter to punish him for his loyalty to Mexico's previous regime. He thought French rule had brought a civilizing influence to the New World, and he had supported Napoleon III. The Mexican revolutionaries who had invaded his home stripped the veneer of civilization away in a heartbeat. His family's final screams still echoing in his head, Maravilla had broken free from the soldiers who had held him captive and fled in a hail of bullets. He eventually escaped his native Mexico and settled in northern Arizona. The solitude of this wild place allowed him to continue his studies of the natural world, including his desire to understand how birds fly, a desire prompted by his daughter's innocent questions. He turned the raven over and wound a tiny hidden key, then stood the raven on its feet. It hopped twice and tilted its head. A living raven flew down from a nearby tree and mimicked the semaculum. Maravilla laughed and clapped his hands in delight as dark memories faded. Startled, the living raven flew up to the cabin roof. The clockwork raven hopped twice more, then spread its wings. It gave a mighty flap, then took to the air, flew 2 circles just as it had been designed to, then landed on the ground. Maravilla watched, mesmerized, as the raven repeated the pattern a second time, then crashed into a tree on its final circle. The professor ran over and retrieved his creation, dusted it off, and breathed a relieved sigh when he could find no damage. He returned it to the ground, satisfied with his experiment. It had moved quite splendidly and almost naturally, if a bit stiff and predictable, as though its life had been extended. He thought this raven should have a name, although Verdad seemed appropriate. The reminder would be too painful. He remembered a tale, the facts in the case of M. Valdemar, written by a fancier of ravens about a man whose life had been extended through the power of mesmerism. He murmured the name aloud, Valdemar. It even started with a V, close, but not too close to his daughter's name. He smiled at his creation. I think that would be a splendid name for you, my friend, the Great Winged Valdemar, or simply Valdemar for short.